She was silent for 143 days, not a word, not a sound, just the soft scuff of her sneakers when she walked and the barely audible inhale when something startled her. That's what trauma does to a child. It steals the noise first, then the light. Before the accident, Lila was the kind of girl who laughed until she snorted, then clapped a hand over her mouth like she'd just broken some secret rule of the universe. She used to talk to butterflies, greet every neighbor by name, tell knock-knock jokes to trees. But all of that disappeared the day she slipped beneath the surface of a pool that should have been guarded. The lifeguard had looked away. They said she was under for less than a minute. But to a father watching his baby's still body pulled out of the water, lungs heaving but eyes vacant, that minute stretched into eternity. And when she opened those eyes again, she wasn't the same child who'd gone under. Physically she was fine, no brain damage, no broken bones, just an invisible wound that turned her voice into something fragile, something she tucked away so deep no one could find it, not even her. For weeks after the hospital released her, she wouldn't let me touch her hair, wouldn't hum along to her favorite lullaby, wouldn't respond when I whispered her name through the bedroom door. I stopped asking questions, stopped begging for answers. I started building instead. I fixed the old xylophone she used to play for the fairies under the porch. I cleared out the crawl space under the stairs, added twinkling lights, sewed star-shaped pillows, and called it her fairy cave. I made it quiet. I made it hers. And slowly, like frost melting off glass, she began to move again. Not speak, not smile, just exist. Then one day, I took her to the park on the edge of our neighborhood. A small patch of green that most folks forgot existed. No modern plastic structures. Just one old wooden swing set and a rusted slide that creaked when the wind pushed it. That swing, God, that swing, it changed everything. Lila walked toward it without looking back. She didn't say a word, just climbed on, fingers curling around the chains, feet dangling. I sat on the nearby bench pretending to scroll through my phone, but really, I was holding my breath, waiting, watching. She began to sway gently, back and forth, back and forth. The creaking of the chain became a rhythm, a heartbeat. Her shoulders relaxed, her head tilted back. And then, in the softest whisper, she said it. More. Just one word. The first since the hospital, the first crack in the wall, and it nearly broke me. From that day on, we returned every evening. Same time, same bench, same swing. It became our ritual. She never said much, sometimes nothing at all, but she always reached for the swing. And as long as she sat on it, she looked a little less broken, a little more like the girl who used to joke with trees. I guarded that time like a lion. The swing wasn't just a wooden plank dangling from chains. It was her therapy, her church, her chance at healing. But healing is delicate. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't stand up to fight. It's a flickering candle in the middle of a storm. And in Thornbridge Hollow, the storm had a name. No one really saw her coming. Meredith Blythe arrived like a shadow at sunset, silent at first, but impossible to ignore once you noticed her. One day, the empty house at number 14 had a dusty for sale sign. The next, a new steel mailbox gleamed beneath a freshly planted bougainvillea. Etched in elegant cursive, Blythe. There was no welcome party, no introductions, just a sudden surge of new rules. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, printed on high-gloss paper with HOA headers and bullet points that reeked of corporate tyranny. At the bottom, her name. Interim HOA president. Appointed, not elected. She claimed there'd been a vote. No one remembered it. She said the bylaws allowed for emergency appointments. No one could find those bylaws, but overnight she became law. And Meredith didn't govern, she ruled. She wore stiff blazers in summer, pearl earrings while jogging, and carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her voice was always too loud for the setting. She barked orders at passing joggers, critiqued patio furniture, measured lawns with a tape measure. She didn't knock on doors. She rang the bell twice and announced her presence like a SWAT team executing a warrant. Violation notice for lawn debris. Driveway edging is 1.8 inches over the limit. Your curtains aren't on the approved beige scale. And she never smiled, not unless she was watching someone squirm. The stories began to circulate. How she fined an 83-year-old widow for a rocking chair that squeaked. How she threatened a boy with suspension from the community centre because he painted a mailbox sky blue with a smiley face. How she posted flyers banning front-yard Halloween decorations for fostering pagan influence. Everyone hated her, but no one fought her. Because Meredith wasn't just cruel, she was clever. She hid behind forms, policies, outdated codes. She knew how to make tyranny look like order. And her latest power grab? A 12-page decree taped to every street lamp, emailed to every resident, declaring a new pet and playground policy. The rules were clear: no chalk drawings, no play after 5 p.m, no pets off leash, and most importantly, no use of HOA-owned park equipment unless you were a member in good standing. The swing, our swing, was now a privilege, not a right. I read the notice twice, my fists tightening with every word. I told myself it wouldn't stand, that it was bluster, that surely not even Meredith would go so far as to enforce it. But deep down, I knew. She didn't write rules for fun. She wrote them like traps, and Lila, with her quiet steps and fragile hope, didn't know anything about rules. She only knew that the swing made her feel whole again. I should have stopped. Should have taken her to another park across town, to a newer swing set with shinier chains and no HOA drama. But that swing was sacred. That little creaky bench at sunset was the only place she ever whispered, "more." And I wasn't going to let some bureaucratic tyrant in heels rip that from her, not after everything. So we kept going. Same time, same swing. Even as I saw Meredith standing at the edge of the park some days, clipboard in hand, sunglasses like armor, watching, waiting. The air around her always felt a few degrees colder, like the calm before a lightning strike. And I knew eventually she'd make her move. I just didn't expect her to start with a slap. It was the kind of afternoon that made you believe in peace. The sun hung low in the sky, soft and golden, draping itself over the trees like a quiet promise. Lila wore her favorite pale pink dress, the one with tiny white daisies stitched around the hem. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, and her purple sneakers kicked up bits of gravel as we made our way down the narrow path. She didn't speak, of course. She never did at the beginning. But her hand found mine, and she gave it the faintest squeeze. That was her way of saying she was ready. We walked the same steps we'd walked 100 times before, like dancers in a private ritual only we understood. She approached the swing like she always did. Slow, focused, like stepping into another world. She climbed on without looking back, and I sat on the weathered bench a few feet away, the one just beside the rusty slide. I kept my hands folded, my eyes pretending to scan the book on my lap, but every part of me was watching her, always watching. Because when you've nearly lost your child, you never stop scanning for shadows, never stop listening for the next crack in the earth beneath you. The chains creaked rhythmically as she swung. Not high, not fast, just enough to feel the breeze against her cheeks, just enough to make her shoes brush the mulch. Her lips parted slightly, not a smile, not quite, but something close. Her head tilted gently, and for a moment it looked like she was humming, even though no sound came. And just as I let my eyes fall shut, just for a second, just long enough for a breath to rise and fall, I heard it, sharp, deliberate, like the clack of bones on pavement, click, click, click. My eyes flew open, and I turned toward the path. Meredith Blythe. The storm in heels. She was approaching with that same slow, arrogant gait, the kind that says, "This world is mine, and you're only borrowing it." She wore a navy blue sheath dress that looked too tight for someone who walked like she owned gravity, her platinum hair sculpted into an immaculate twist. Her sunglasses sat high on the bridge of her nose like a judge's gavel, and in one hand she held a rolled stack of papers. Winston, her pampered chihuahua, trailed behind her like a wind-up toy, his rhinestone leash dragging along the gravel path like the tail of a serpent. She didn't look at me, didn't glance at the other parents nearby, didn't nod, didn't wave, didn't offer even a shallow smirk of civility. Her eyes were locked on Lila, on my daughter, on that swing, and I knew. I knew before she even opened her mouth that the moment had come. The rule wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a weapon she was ready to wield. "Excuse me," she called out, louder than necessary, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. "That child is not authorized to use this equipment." The chains creaked to a stop. Lila froze mid-swing. She looked up slowly, her eyes wide, her lips pressed together. She didn't know what to do. She didn't understand what was happening. All she knew was that the safety of her quiet sanctuary had just been shattered. "I said get off," Meredith barked, her voice sharp and cold. I rose to my feet, slowly, cautiously, like a man walking across a frozen lake he knows is about to crack. My hands clenched instinctively, my breath tightened in my throat, but before I could move, she stepped closer to the swing, raised her hand and grabbed the chain. She yanked it. Lila's body jolted sideways. One of her hands slipped off the metal, her balance broke, her small frame twisted as the swing bucked under her. She tumbled off the seat and crashed into the mulch with a dull, sickening thud. Her head struck the wooden border that lined the edge of the playground. She didn't scream, just curled into herself like a wounded animal, her little hands tightening into fists against her chest. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, shallow and shaky. And then, Meredith did the unthinkable. She lifted her foot. In that instant I saw it, her heel rising like the tip of a guillotine, her posture bracing as if to deliver a second blow to a child already stunned on the ground. And in that breathless heartbeat, time slowed. I didn't think. I didn't weigh my options. I didn't consider the consequences. I moved. I walked. Not fast, not wild, just focused. I crossed the playground, past the stunned faces of other parents frozen in disbelief, past the faint cries of a toddler behind the slide, past the silent horror that had cloaked the park in a suffocating stillness. I walked back to my car, opened the trunk, pulled out the steel bat that had sat untouched beneath a pile of jumper cables and old sports gear for years. It was heavy, cold, familiar. I closed the trunk, and I turned. The air felt different then, thicker, charged, like the sky before a thunderclap. I walked back toward the swing, toward Meredith. She had turned away from Lila and was brushing invisible lint from her dress like she had just flicked a leaf off her shoulder. She didn't notice me at first. Not until I was close enough for her to catch the glint of steel in the corner of her vision. She turned. Her smile flickered, then hardened. "You touch me," she snapped, voice rising, "and I'll bury you in lawsuits." I didn't reply. She raised her phone. "I'm filming. This is evidence." Still, I said nothing. And then I lifted the bat. The first swing shattered her phone, sent it flying from her hand in an explosion of sparks and plastic. She gasped, not in pain, yet, but in sheer disbelief. The second swing crashed into her knee. She buckled instantly. Her scream cut through the silence like a siren. She dropped to the mulch, clutching her leg, mascara already smearing down her cheek. "You don't touch my daughter," I said, my voice low, solid. "You don't speak to her. You don't look at her." She screamed again, something wild and shrill, but no one moved. No one came running. The other parents just stood there, eyes wide, mouths open, as if watching a nightmare they'd all lived under finally collapse into dust. "You're insane," she shrieked. "You're going to jail. You hear me? You're dead. Do you understand? Dead." She tried to crawl away, but the mulch tangled in her dress. Her heels scraped uselessly against the gravel. Her hands flailed. She looked nothing like the queen of order she believed herself to be. She looked like what she really was, just a woman drunk on power, finally learning what it meant to be powerless. And I stood there, breathing heavy, the bat still in my grip. Not out of rage now, but something colder, something sharper. Justice. As Meredith writhed in the mulch, clutching her knee like it had been ripped from its socket, her shrieks echoing through the park like sirens from a crumbling empire, the bat in my hand lowered, not out of mercy, but because what needed to be said had already been carved into the silence. My daughter still lay where she had fallen, her tiny fingers trembling, a thin red line weaving through her hair where her head struck the border of the swing set, but there was no scream, no whimper. Just the stunned stillness of a child who had already learned that sometimes silence was safer than sound. And then there was a noise I didn't expect, a low guttural growl. It wasn't mine. It came from Winston, The same pampered, bow-wearing Chihuahua Meredith had dragged around like a symbol of her status, the same one she dressed in pink velvet sweaters and wheeled through the annual community pet parade in a baby stroller with rhinestone trim. That dog, her accessory, her toy, was now hunched beside her in the mulch, ears pinned back, teeth bared. It wasn't fear, it wasn't confusion, it was focus. His eyes were locked on her. She noticed too late. "Winston," she whimpered. "It's Mummy! It's Mummy, baby! What are you doing?" The dog took a slow step forward, and then he lunged, not at me, not at the other parents, but at her, straight for her skirt, yanking with surprising force for a creature so small. He snapped at her wrist, barked into her face, pawed at her thigh as if trying to tear her away from the ground she'd ruled from for so long. Meredith screamed, not from pain, not yet, but from something worse, realization. This wasn't just about a man defending his daughter anymore. This was about something deeper, something ancient. The unspoken understanding between creatures, human or not, about right and wrong. The moment even your own dog turns against you, you know the throne is gone. Finally, Winston stopped. Not because she commanded it, but because he was done. His message had been delivered. And then, to everyone's shock, he turned his back on her, padded across the mulch, and sat beside Lila. She was sitting upright now, knees pulled to her chest, hands shaking slightly, but her eyes tracking the small dog as he approached. Slowly, he reached her, sniffed her fingers, licked her palm. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. Meredith saw it. She let out a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard from her before. A broken, guttural gasp that wasn't pain or fury, but betrayal. "No, that's my dog. He's mine. Winston, come back to Mommy." I turned to face her again. I didn't speak right away. I let the moment thicken around us like smoke. Then I said quietly, "I think he made a better choice." She stared up at me, dirt on her cheek, lipstick smeared, one shoe gone, and for the first time since she moved into Thornbridge Hollow, she didn't have a comeback. She whimpered. And I decided then, she wasn't going to leave this park the way she came in, not upright, not untouched, not unmarked by what she'd tried to destroy. I stepped past her, bent down, unclipped the rhinestone leash from Winston's collar. It was ridiculous. Pink leather, tiny diamond studs, a silver heart-shaped tag that read, Winston, HOA Elite. I walked back to her slowly. She saw it dangling in my hand, and her breath caught in her throat. "Get up," I said. She didn't move. So I knelt, grabbed her wrist. She shrieked and tried to pull away, but her strength was gone. The pain had hollowed her out. I looped the leash around her forearm, twice, tight enough that her skin pressed against the leather. She screamed something, about lawsuits, about assault, but I wasn't listening. I yanked once. She toppled forward, and I dragged her, through the mulch, through the grass she once forced a young couple to re-sod because it wasn't uniform enough. Past the bench where she fined a war veteran for exceeding seating time. Across the sandpit where she scolded two autistic boys for laughing too loud. Her voice scraped the air with pleas and threats, but I didn't stop. The leash burned against her wrist. Her knees tore against the gravel. Her once pristine dress twisted and tore, speckled with dirt and shame. She tried to claw at the ground, to hook her fingers into the grass, but it slipped through like smoke. "Someone help me," she sobbed. "This man is insane. He's dragging me." Parents stood frozen. Some lifted their phones, some just watched. But not one of them moved. Not to help, not to stop. They had seen her rule by fear for too long. They had watched her harass, bully, fine, and humiliate neighbors over garden gnomes and wind chimes and chalk drawings. And now they watched her squirm, not in silence, but in justice. We reached the engraved brick path, the pride of the HOA. Each brick bore the name of a donor, a committee member, a rule follower. 5 of them bore her name. I slammed the leash downward, forcing her cheek into the dirt above the one that read, Meredith Blythe, Order and Class. I knelt, brought my lips to her ear. "You wanted order," I whispered. "Here's your order. Stay down, shut your mouth, and never, ever raise your hand against a child again." Her breath came in ragged sobs. She spat dirt from her lips. "Please, please." Her voice broke like cracked porcelain. I dropped the leash, walked away, and as I did, Winston, still beside Lila, thumped his tail once against the ground. A quiet approval. My daughter didn't speak, but she reached out, rested her hand gently on his back. He nestled closer, guarding her, choosing her, and in that moment, everyone in that park understood something that would never be forgotten. Meredith Blythe had ruled with threats and forms and fear, but she'd forgotten the one rule that mattered more than any regulation, any HOA clause or fine. The heart remembers. Loyalty cannot be forced, and respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. By the time the flashing red and blue lights lit up the entrance of the park, Meredith was still lying on the ground, her once polished exterior reduced to a tangle of bruises, torn fabric, and dried dirt. Her white sunglasses were cracked and buried somewhere in the grass. Her designer heels had long since flown off in opposite directions, one lodged halfway into a flower bed. Her face, streaked with tears and blood, was no longer the smug mask of authority she wore so proudly. It was something else now, hollow, stunned, utterly lost. When the cruiser rolled to a halt and the officers stepped out, everyone in the park turned, not with fear, not with tension, but with something like relief, like a chapter was closing. "Step away from the woman," one of them ordered, hand hovering near his belt. I didn't resist, didn't run, didn't even speak at first. I simply raised my hands, backed up 2 slow steps, and stood in silence. Not because I felt guilty, but because I felt done. The officer's partner knelt beside Meredith, checking her pulse, looking into her eyes, asking her to speak. Her voice was hoarse, cracked like a dry riverbed. "He attacked me," she choked, "dragged me like a dog. He broke my leg. He's dangerous." The first officer turned to me. "Is that true?" I didn't blink. "She slapped my daughter," I said flatly. "Knocked her off a swing, tried to kick her while she was on the ground. That's what started this." Meredith let out a hysterical laugh, the kind of sound that curdled your stomach. "It was an accident. I nudged the swing, that's all." But the park was quiet. Until one voice rose, a soft, trembling voice that carried more weight than a siren. "I recorded everything." Mrs. Calloway, widowed, grey-haired, the same woman Meredith once fined for having too many solar lights on her walkway, stepped forward with her phone extended. Her hand shook, but her eyes did not. From the moment she approached the girl, the slap, the swing, all of it. Meredith's face drained of all colour. You could see the moment realization sank in, when her lies couldn't outrun the truth anymore. The officers took the phone, began watching in silence. Then came the second blow to her pride. Another neighbour stepped forward, Mr. Park, the Korean war vet Meredith had threatened with eviction over a garden flag. He didn't say a word, just stood there beside Mrs. Calloway, arms folded, jaw set, like a wall she could no longer climb. Then another voice, and another. One by one, parents who had been frozen in fear began to close in, not with pitchforks, but with quiet presence. No one defended her. Not a single soul offered comfort. "I'll sue all of you," Meredith wailed as she was helped to her feet. "You let this happen. You all stood there and did nothing." The first officer glanced at his partner and gave a short nod. "Ma'am," he said, voice calm but firm, "you're being placed under investigation for child endangerment and aggravated assault. You'll be transported for evaluation and questioning." Her eyes went wild. "This is my neighborhood. I built this place. These people owe me." But the crowd didn't budge. No one reached for her. No one argued on her behalf. Not even Winston. The dog sat quietly beside Lila, who was now wrapped in a warm flannel blanket someone had pulled from their car. Her knees were hugged to her chest, and though her expression remained unreadable, her hand gently threaded through the dog's fur, rhythmic and slow. The bond between them, though just born, was unbreakable. "Sir," one officer said, stepping toward me, "we'll need a statement and—" He glanced over his shoulder at the gathering crowd. "There's been a request." I raised an eyebrow. "They'd like to offer your daughter custody of the dog." I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. He knelt beside Lila. "Sweetheart, What's your name? She didn't answer, just pulled something from her pocket. A napkin, crumpled and worn with purple marker scribbled across it. 3 letters. Joy. The officer smiled. Is that her name? I nodded slowly. It is now. As they helped Meredith into the cruiser, her shrieks began again, this time louder, more unhinged. Winston, come here, now, come to Mommy. The dog didn't move, didn't twitch. Then slowly he stood, walked right past the cruiser and into the field. He paused beneath the HOA President Reserved parking sign, sniffed the base, then lifted one hind leg and urinated on it. The silence that followed was deafening, then brilliant. Someone stifled a laugh. Someone else didn't bother trying. Meredith lost it, screaming, thrashing, pounding her cuffed fists against the inside of the cruiser window. No! That's mine! That's my dog! He's mine! But no one listened anymore. The officer driving adjusted the rearview mirror, muttered something under his breath, and started the engine. The door slammed shut with a metallic thud. The cruiser pulled away, and Meredith Blythe, the self-appointed queen of Thornbridge Hollow, disappeared down the hill, still screaming after a dog who never looked back. Winston returned to Joy's side and sat as if he had always belonged there. There was no HOA meeting after that, no public statement, no letters of apology. Meredith's house went dark for weeks. Her infamous plaques, the no trespassing signs, the rules keepers civil posters, the custom engraved bricks, were quietly removed one by one. No one touched her hedges, no one maintained her flower beds. The throne had crumbled, and no one rushed to rebuild it. Then something began to happen, something soft. Mr. Park showed up one morning with a gallon of blue paint and brushed over the HOA's "Rules Enforced Here" sign. He left it blank. The next day, Mrs. Calloway added a border of painted flowers. A few teenagers chalked wild swirls across the sidewalk in neon colors. No one stopped them. No one told them it violated anything. Neighbors began to speak again, not as residents but as people. There were no elections, no bylaws, no emergency committees, just conversations, kind ones. Someone suggested forming a community council, shared voice, equal say, no fines, no fear. No one objected. I didn't say much, didn't need to. They saw me, every day, planting sunflowers near the park fence, replacing the broken swing, building a new bench beside the tree where Joy and Winston liked to sit. Most days, she swung alone, not high, not fast, just gently, in rhythm, not afraid. One morning, I found a laminated paper taped to the bench I'd built. No name, no signature, just 5 words. Call it the Garden of Joy. I didn't ask who wrote it. I left it there. The next weekend, someone carved it into wood, stained it, and placed it beside the swing. No votes, no ceremony, just a quiet choice. Joy stood beside the swing in her pink dress, wind tugging lightly at the hem. Winston sat at her feet. The benches were full. Neighbors who once stayed behind their doors now brought lemonade and lawn chairs. No one wore name tags. No one needed to. She looked at her shoes, then at the swing, then at the people. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but it carried. Thank you for saving the swing. Then she stepped forward, rested her hand on the chain, and added, My dad saved me first. Then the swing did. Then Winston. Now, it's my turn. She smiled, not wide, not big, but true. She climbed onto the swing, pushed off, back and forth. The creak was gone, the chain was smooth. Someone clapped, then another, and then everyone. Not for noise, but for what came next. Joy laughed, not loud, not long, just a breathless burst of life, like it had waited behind her ribs for too long and finally broke free. That sound, that was the real victory, not the punishment, not the moment Meredith fell. But this was healing. In motion, in sunlight, in the echo of a child's laugh reclaiming the space where fear used to live. And that's the truth no rulebook can ever control. When love grows roots in a place once ruled by fear, you don't need power to protect it. You only need to stay, to stand, to say, no more. And from that day forward, Thornbridge Hollow was never the same, because now it belonged to Joy.